Mr. Harrison Price from the historic Wall Center, our next guest, TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Happy New Year, Darren Dreger. How are things?
Things are well. Happy New Year to you guys. And here I am in the historic Dreger home studio. So it kind of, I don't know, you guys, I know, Blake, you were working, and Matt, not that you weren't. I mean, we were kind of piecing through the holiday season, but it felt really disjointed. Like I felt like I'd have to start work a little bit, and then I'd stop because, wait, this is a holiday. I don't want to bother anybody. No, now we got to start again. Yep. So that as we're having this conversation here on Monday, January 6th, it feels like we can get into this new year and get going again.
Absolutely. See, the thing is, when Christmas falls on a Wednesday, it really screws up 2 different weeks, right? Because January 1st falls on a Wednesday.
Yeah. Doesn't the last Christmas party that you went to feel like 7 months ago, though? Like I was at a Christmas party on like the 21st and the 20th. That was 7 months ago.
But
I'm
some of them happen November now. Like you're wishing Merry Christmas in November.
But you're talking privately here, Blake, because as we know, corporate Canada, corporate world doesn't do the Christmas party.
They don't do a Christmas party.
No.
That has been crossed off the expense sheet everywhere. Okay, let's get at it. So. Neither Miller nor Pettersson has requested a trade. You have information on whether JT would be willing to waive his trade protection.
Well, look, it's more about where the process is right now. And based on the information that I've been given from that camp, from the Miller camp, is that the Canucks have not approached JT Miller with anything, any scenario to say, hey, if we can make this work, would you be willing to waive your no move clause? At last check yesterday, that hadn't happened. And look, it may happen, it may not happen, not to be loose in this, but that's the reality of the situation. As for Pettersson, a little bit more complicated. He doesn't have the same level of trade protection yet. That no move kicks in July. So the Vancouver Canucks do have a little bit more flexibility. But I think this is such an international hot potato that we just keep juggling it, right? We being the collective media and the fan base, because, it's clear that there's been a high level of inconsistency around the game the Vancouver Canucks are playing. And you can see it. You can see it on the faces of the players. You can see it on the face of Rick Tocchet, the head coach, and on it goes. So I'm not saying it's a non-story, but what I think is the reality of where we're at in the regular season also has to be checked here. And undoubtedly, Patrick Allvin and Jimmy Rutherford are having numerous conversations. I would bet that just about every team in the league has checked in on both of those players. And, there's been speculation of, okay, this team, that team, Detroit, the Islanders, go down the list. Carolina, I know historically has expressed interest in Pettersson, but none of that means that a deal on either side is imminent or imminent, meaning to the end of the year. And when you're talking about the players of this magnitude in Vancouver, you darn well better get what you need in return. You're talking about top 2 centers, right? So it's not just that top 4 defenseman. Now you need centers, more than one, coming back as part of this transaction. Guys, who's tearing apart their roster the midpoint of the NHL regular season to make this deal? Because it can't be about futures for the Vancouver Canucks. It has to be about what's happening here and now and what makes us better. So, we can talk about it all we want, but I don't think that there's any deal that's closer than it was the last time we spoke.
I've been adamant that the Canucks are going to be far better off if they solve this internally and both players stay. Like that, they are a better team with those players like that. And it sounds like they know it. Pettersson was asked about it today, adamant that he wants to stay Vancouver Canuck. That's why I signed here, and said, I'm sure it will all go away if I play better and if we win. And it's as simple as that. And they can quiet all this noise down. It's just easier said than done. They can't seem to play any better right now. And the injuries are a big part of it. No Hughes, no Pettersson for the last little while. But my goodness, does winning solve a lot of things?
Yeah, but look, the injuries eventually are going to be a non-issue. I know that Dakota Joshua is now on the list, so that's a hole in the lineup, but they've had to deal with that. They dealt with it earlier in the season. Getting Pettersson and Quinn Hughes back into the mix, a healthy Thatcher Demko again. I mean, those are all just key pieces. So if these two guys can coexist and they can find a way to contribute and play the games that they're paid to play and produce as they're paid to produce, I think that the ripple effect of this is going to be ginormous. I do, because look, there's no way that this isn't a distraction inside that room. And I'm not just talking about those two guys. I'm talking about, Boeser and everybody else that has to go into every scrum and talk about it whether they like it or not. And there's no chance that they like it. So how much of this influences the game of a Brock Boeser?
Never mind the off-ice stuff, though, Dregs. They also just know it's affecting their ability to win the hockey. Like Brock Boeser wants to win that hockey game, too, and he knows that all this noise is clearly affecting the on-ice performance of these two guys.
100%. And look, it's not like management is letting these guys off the hook either, right? There have been some good positive stories around the Vancouver Canucks. Guys who have contributed that maybe are unexpected, but you're glad to have that level of secondary scoring. Well, that's fine. That's how you win games, the tough games, and that's how you win in the playoffs. But you can't do either of those things, win games or win in the playoffs, unless your top guys are going on a consistent basis. And really, that's been the biggest issue. But it's not as simple as making a trade and making the problems go away. And I think you're bang on when you say the fix needs to be internal. It does. And it's possible that it could be fixed pretty quickly. Look, I'm glad to see and hear Pettersson take accountability and responsibility and acknowledge that this will fade if he plays the game that he needs to play. But it can't just be offensive. That's why he's earning the big bucks. But if he's going to put in the work, he's going to get better defensively, and he's going to get better and stronger physically and become a more well-rounded player. Well, maybe he doesn't have JT Miller nipping at his heels every single day. And maybe that gives fodder for some of the other experienced guys in the room to go to JT and say, hey, stop it. Stop it. You worry about your game and don't worry about his. We'll manage this collectively.
And JT's got enough worries about his game, too.
Brian Burke mentioned to our colleague Jeff Merrick on Friday, he says, looking at this from the outside in, I'm sure Rutherford, Alvin, Tocchet have had all the conversations with both of them, and that it isn't fixed. And that it isn't fixed. This is their way of basically publicly shaming them, saying, okay, guys, you go fix it now because it's public, it's a shit show, and we've done all our best to try and fix it. Unsuccessfully thus far. That tracks for you?
100% that tracks. I mean, just think of the character that Rick Tocchet is, and then the people that he's flanked by on that coaching staff. I mean, I can envision somebody like Adam Foote dealing with this back in his day with the Colorado Avalanche in practice. Or Rick Tocchet dealing with it in practice, where you grab both helmets in the corner and smash them together and just say, stop it. Like, it's for the greater good. Look, every team goes through turmoil. Every team has internal issues that generally we in the media never learn about. We don't know about, and therefore the fan base doesn't know about it, and it doesn't become an angle or fodder for constant speculation. So enough is enough. That's really what it boils down to. And I think that tracks beautifully with the Canucks as an organization being okay with this getting out there public. But when I say enough is enough, that also applies to where we're at and the fact we're continuing to have this conversation week after week. So the message is out there. Now it's on the players to try and fix it. Because last time I checked, I can find a player on every team that would probably surprise most people as to the fact that general manager is listening on trade interest and is continually having conversations with trade interest. I don't recall a time when we're talking about players of the magnitude of Elias Pettersson and JT Miller, two guys from the same team, two, essential pieces, and visualizing the possibility of one or both of them being traded at this point in the season.
You've talked about Boeser and his contentment with what's going on here.
Before we go to Boeser, though.
No, I'm going to move on here. We're talking about Hughes. Like, this is wearing on Hughes.
I don't want to leave Miller Pettersson.
We're all still talking about it. Patience, grasshopper.
We got a Miller Pettersson thing going on here in the studio as well, Dregs, as you make.
Patience, grasshopper.
Hey, do I need to be Rick Tocchet and bring you guys together?
You might have to.
That's where I'm going.
Crashing helmets.
So Boeser, and I think people are watching saying, well, what is Boeser thinking of? What's Hughes thinking of all this? If you watch Rick Tocchet's last couple of media availabilities.
Yeah.
That guy looks pretty worn down too. Because I'm sure he would love to solve it in one way or the other, but he clearly doesn't have the magic touch. Like, is Coach getting worn out by all this too, do you think?
Well, I mean, it kind of looks that way. I mean, I haven't had that conversation with him, but again, I visualize the old duck analogy, right? He's trying to be calm above the surface of the water, but beneath the surface, there's a lot going on there, right? Mm-hmm. And so we only know a fraction of what, Rick Tocchet, the coaching staff and management have had to deal with to this point of the year. And then you look at the standings and you look at where the Vancouver Canucks are positioned. And I read the article that Ian McIntyre wrote in the sit down with Patrick Galvin and his layers of disappointment and all of that. And I understand that because, look, when this season started, the entire group felt like they were going to be a contending team, and they still might be a contending team. It's still early enough to say that. But I think Tocchet and the coaching staff have done an incredible job of doing things well enough to keep the group well enough together to stay in games and win some games that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise won. And Alvin is looking at it differently, and I can appreciate that. They've won games where they probably shouldn't, but they've lost games where they should have won. And I get all that. But if I'm an expiring contract like Brock Boeser, who I know has a lot of time for Rick Tocchet, there wouldn't be a player, I don't think there'd be many, I'm saying there wouldn't be a player in that room that doesn't appreciate the history and the coaching style of Rick Tocchet. But it's fair to question, well, what is his future? Rick Tocchet's, that is, with the Vancouver Canucks. And how much does that influence if you're Brock Boeser and you've engaged in negotiations with the Canucks on an extension? How much does that influence what ultimately his decision might be? And I think it does. I don't think
you'd want to know. You'd want to know.
Yeah.
Well, Tocchet's out of contract at the end of the season, but someone recently mentioned to me that's by Rick's choice. That's not a managerial thing.
Yeah. It's an optional. I know that he likes coaching. What's plan B if you're not coaching in Vancouver? Waiting for another head coaching opportunity, going back to TV. I mean, he was excellent at TNT. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think that Rick Tocchet has walked away from a challenge one time in his entire life. But maybe, again, to go back to where I started in answering the question, maybe there's a lot more that has gone into what Tocchet has had to do to keep this group together than any of us are ever going to know until that chapter of the book is written in retirement.
Yeah. Getting back to Boeser, do you think Boeser's future here pivots on Tocchet's then? That if Rick's not back, Brock
I think that has an influence. I do. I think that that's a factor in it. I wouldn't say that that's, the reason he's going to stay or he's going to leave. It's a factor, and that's not unusual. I think that a lot of pending unrestricted free agents across the league would do that, especially if they've got a sense that there could be a coaching change. What are things like in the second half of the season, right? I mean, if the team is coming together and there's a better sense of cohesiveness and Brock is performing and he's putting up the numbers and all of a sudden now he likes the group again, sure, I think that he'd be open to listening. Why wouldn't he? It's a business as well. But I don't think that he is going to be in any hurry to sign on the dotted line. I think that there's an excellent chance that we're talking about Brock Boeser when the trade deadline rolls around on March 7th. I do.
To your point, all this has gone down. And the Canucks still aren't the Rangers. Like they're having a disappointing year. No. They're having a disappointing year, to be sure.
Yeah,
but they're not the Rangers. Like a 4-game win streak, which is not a crazy thing. All teams have 4-game winning streaks. A 4-game winning streak, and the Canucks are. I mean, they're probably back into the top 3 of their division with that.
Yeah, and they're not. Look, I mean, what we've already talked about at length here, the scenario of Pettersson and Miller and some of the other issues around the Vancouver Canucks, in my opinion, pale in comparison to how, say, Jake Trouba was dragged through the mud before essentially being forced out as captain of the New York Rangers. And then Kaapo Kakko, such a talented young man. Okay, wasn't comfortable, didn't quite fit, but you know where I'm going. A valued asset that just gets moved and seems to be doing okay now. And there'll be other pieces that fall in New York. That's inevitable. I don't see any of that. There's going to be change. That's just the model that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin will always follow. Get in early and try and get your business out of the way well in advance of the deadline. And look, again, if Miller and Pettersson settle down and things start coming together there, that doesn't mean like that Allvin and the Canucks are going to stand pat. They still need that defenseman, and they still need a forward. So I'm sure there are multiple conversations of adding in other areas that we're not even considering at this point.
Yeah. Speaking of the Rangers, there was a report last week that Miller would waive to go to the Rangers, and many people are connecting the two teams in part because of the dysfunction going on with the Rangers. And Mika Zibanejad coming back to Vancouver to play with his fellow Swede, Elias Pettersson.
Yeah.
You told us that the Canucks have not approached JT about waiving, but what's your sense? Is there a fit to be had there between those two players?
Well, I mean, from Miller's standpoint, I'm sure the New York Rangers would have interest. There's history there. He's the type of player that every team in the league, when he's clicking, wants to have. No doubt about that. But at the time of the report, I was told by someone close to the Miller camp that no, there's nothing to it. Vancouver is not approached. It's not about one team. And unless they approach, how can it be about one team? Right? I mean, he's got the full no move clause, so there's no point really engaging in deep trade conversations unless you know there's a willingness from that player to eventually participate. And as of that conversation, that hadn't happened.
Do you think he's dinged?
And Zibanejad, sorry.
Go.
Zibanejad's full move too.
Yeah.
Dregs. Do you know anything there?
No, not as firm. Not as firm. And I don't want to have you read into that to say that, he's been presented, they've gone to him, there's some wiggle room in any of that. The sense that I was given by someone close is that it is unlikely that he would waive to go to Vancouver. But in saying that, if that's the case, he may not waive to go anywhere. I mean, that's the thing about New York, right? Those players, they're not loving the way this season has unfolded, or in certain cases, how players have been treated. They love New York, and they love Manhattan, and they love everything about being a New York Ranger, aside from the dark side of what's gone on this year.
Just last on Miller, do you think he's injured? Like, his 5-on-5 play has just been absent completely this season.
I wonder.
I mean, to what do we? He's managing to keep almost a point per game via special teams and such, but his inability to score goals and just, there's no loud shifts like we normally see out of JT Miller.
Right.
Everybody's dinged. I should go further than that. Do you think he's dealing with something here?
Well, all I know is, that was part of what contributed to his decision to take the leave of absence, right? Mm-hmm. It was a number of things, and the majority of them were personal and none of our business, quite frankly. But, included in the explanation to me at the time when the Canucks granted the leave of absence was that he did have something physical that was nagging and was bothering him. And look, Toronto's gone through something similar with Austin Matthews. You don't know how tough these players are and you don't even need to know the specifics, but the fact that they're playing through something on a shift by shift basis. So I don't have the information to verify that JT is playing through something. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that though. Because I would tend to agree. It's in his DNA to play the game the way he plays the game, and we're not seeing it
for sure. And you're just not seeing that. No, absolutely. Okay, so to recap here, if
we need graphics, get the graphics.
If Miller was willing to move or to waive, that's a pretty easy trade for the Vancouver Canucks to make, given the interest out there. Pettersson, given the salary being where it is and the fact that someone would have to remodel their team for him, that's a more difficult one to make in season.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. But I don't doubt for a second that there are teams around the league that have sharp pencils and are pushing numbers around trying to figure out how they could make that work. I mean, if it turns out that Elias Pettersson is an elite level talent and is proving that with his level of production a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to look back at that deal at 8 years at $11.6 million and go, yeah, he was worth it. And I think that's part of the pause that the Vancouver Canucks have to take into consideration as well. It's a tough deal to make right now, certainly from a mathematics perspective on Pettersson. Difficult from JT Miller's standpoint because, yeah, there's money involved as well. But he's such an important piece that you're going to have to tear up your roster to some degree to give the Vancouver Canucks the pieces that they need. And that's assuming that they go to Miller and he goes, yeah, I'll accept that. I think we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, well, and the other thing they have to consider with Elias is a 26-year-old two-way centerman. Like, to get that trade. There's a lot of fans here who think they couldn't win an Elias Pettersson trade. Drex, do you think they could win or make a fair trade for Pettersson in this environment?
In season, I think it'd be a real challenge. I would bet that they don't win in season, and history has shown if you can afford to be patient, and I do think the Canucks can afford to be patient, you get to the off season and things open up. Just do it before July 1st.
Yeah,
yes,
of course.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely. Marvelous stuff, sir.
Okay, guys.
We'll reconvene next Monday, and we'll have a whole bunch of more hypothetical questions to ask you on Miller and Pettersson.
Just going to say, I wonder what we'll talk about.
That's how this works.